All right, so today we're going to deconstruct something you really don't see every day. It's a sixth grade math review, but it's doing so much more than just solving for x. It's trying to blend, simple arithmetic with these really big allegorical stories. So let's break down exactly how they do it.
So, it all kicks off with a problem that should feel super familiar, right? I mean, you've probably seen this 1,000 times. 4x equals 100. It's simple, it's straightforward algebra. But the context here? Yeah, it is anything but typical.
Because, get this, in this particular lesson, that equation is directly tied to a story about a shepherd and his 100 sheep. And that, right there, is the central question we're digging into today. How does framing a math problem inside a moral story completely change the lesson itself?
Okay, so what we're looking at here is a sixth grade math review that's intentionally embedding these algebraic equations inside faith-based parables. And the goal, you'll see, isn't just to find the right answer. It's really about connecting the cold, hard logic of math to a much broader moral framework. Now, I want to be super clear here. Our focus is really on the pedagogical approach. In other words, the method of teaching. We're not just looking at the math problems themselves, but how they're being taught and, the whole narrative world they get dropped into. Okay, but before we get into all the stories, we've got to understand the purely mathematical foundation of this lesson. Let's just look at the core problems the students are actually being asked to solve. So the equations themselves are pretty standard for this grade level. Solving for a single variable, some division, some multiplication. But the real key here is that column right next to them, the story context. See how each problem is already linked to a whole narrative? A fisherman, a vineyard, a shepherd? That's our way in. So, okay, how does this all work in practice? This is where we get to the real core of the lesson, right? This is where abstract numbers get translated into these tangible, story-driven examples. It's literally where algebra meets allegory. Okay, here's the method in action. On one side, you've got the pure abstract equation, 3x equals 120. But then look at the story. It completely transforms x into the daily catch of a fisherman. And all of a sudden, the math isn't just numbers on a page. It represents something real, sustenance, effort, daily work. And this pattern just continues. The next equation, x equals 500 divided by 2, well, it isn't just about division. It's framed as a decision, a choice about how to manage a harvest. When half the wine is sold, the math becomes this tangible act of managing your resources and, planning for the future. And this brings us right back to where we started, with our shepherd. The equation 4x equals 100 becomes a story about responsible stewardship. You have a shepherd making sure his flock of 100 sheep is properly cared for by dividing them equally among 4 pastures. So what's x? It's 25 sheep per pasture. Okay, so we've seen the how, but now let's talk about the why. Why go to all this trouble wrapping simple math equations in these elaborate stories? Well, the lesson plan itself actually gives us a very direct answer. This quote from the lesson gets right to the heart of the philosophy behind it all. The whole point, they say, is to teach that math isn't just some abstract skill. It's a tool for putting virtues like fairness, planning, and responsibility into action. And those stories, they're designed to be the most direct examples of that. The lesson then grounds this whole idea in a specific piece of scripture from the parable of the talents. And the connection they're making is really explicit. Being diligent in your studies, practicing your math, is presented as a form of faithfulness. It's something that prepares you for a life of wisdom and service. Now, this teaching method, it doesn't just stop with the examples in class. Nope, it's carried all the way through to the homework, where students aren't just asked to solve problems, but to actually create them, using the very same framework. Check out this exercise. The task isn't simply to solve 2x equals 60. Step 1 is to create a real-world story for it. And the example they give frames it around fair pay. 2 workers earn $60 total. So the student has to take that abstract algebra and turn it back into a story about fairness. So when you put it all together, the key takeaway here is pretty clear. This isn't just about making up word problems. It's a whole curriculum that intentionally reframes math equations as if they were parables. The entire learning process, from the examples they give to the homework they assign, is grounded in this moral framework where solving for X is also a lesson in things like fairness and responsibility. And that leaves us with a really fascinating final question to think about. Look, this is just one example, right, from one very specific worldview. But it kind of forces us to consider a much bigger idea. How does the story we tell about a problem, whether that problem is in math or science or history, how does that story actually change the way we learn how to solve it?